The first sign that something was wrong was not the pain in my chest. It was the way the room seemed to tilt while everyone around me kept laughing. I was standing near the back of the private event hall, holding a stack of place cards my mother had handed me 15 minutes earlier, when the chandeliers above the dance floor blurred into long streaks of light. I blinked hard and gripped the edge of a linen-covered table. Across the room, my brother Grant stood beside our father, with one hand raised around a champagne glass. Someone had just introduced him as the newest regional operations director at Harrington Logistics, and the applause rolled through the room like the announcement mattered more than my father's 60th birthday. To be fair, in my family, it probably did. My mother, Marianne, had spent 3 months planning the party, but every speech, every photograph, and every seating arrangement somehow pointed back to Grant. His promotion had become the real celebration. My father, Howard, looked happier talking about Grant's future than he did cutting his own birthday cake. I told myself I did not care. I was 32 years old, lived in my own apartment, paid my own bills, and worked as a senior financial analyst for a construction equipment distributor. I had built a life that did not depend on my parents' approval. At least, that was what I told myself whenever I walked into a family gathering and immediately felt 16 again. "Audra, could you take care of the guest book?" My mother had asked the moment I arrived. Grant shouldn't have to worry about little details tonight. Grant had arrived 20 minutes later and received a round of applause. I received a pen and a list of missing place cards. That was how things had always worked. Grant's time mattered. Mine was available. Grant's nerves meant pressure. Mine meant drama. Grant's mistakes were stress. Mine were proof that I was too sensitive. I had learned to make myself useful before anyone had the chance to call me difficult. So when the first wave of dizziness hit, I did what I had always done. I ignored it. I put the place cards down, took a slow breath, and told myself I had skipped lunch. Then my heart gave one hard, uneven thump. Another followed too quickly, then another. I pressed 2 fingers to my wrist, but the rhythm was impossible to count. Fast, then slow, then fast again. My palms turned cold. The room was warm from too many bodies, but a chill ran across my shoulders. I stepped away from the table and headed toward the hallway near the restrooms, hoping 5 quiet minutes would fix whatever was happening. I almost made it. Halfway there, my vision narrowed. The voices behind me became muffled, as if everyone had moved to the other side of a closed door. I reached for the wall. "You okay?" a woman I barely knew asked. I recognized her as one of Grant's former coaches. "I just need a minute," I said. Even to me, my voice sounded thin. She nodded and turned back toward the speech. I kept moving. I had experienced small things before. A few seconds of dizziness after standing too quickly. A strange pounding heartbeat after climbing stairs. Breathlessness that seemed out of proportion after carrying groceries. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that had ever sent me to a hospital. When I was 19 and nearly fainted during a summer shift at a bookstore, my mother told me I was dehydrated and needed to stop making people worry. When I mentioned occasional chest fluttering in my 20s, Grant joked that my body was as anxious as my personality. Everyone laughed, including me. Laughing first had become one of my favorite survival skills. If I laughed with them, it hurt less when they laughed at me. But this was different. By the time I reached the hallway, I could not pull in a full breath. I inhaled, but it felt as though the air stopped halfway down. I tried again. The pressure in my chest tightened. My knees weakened, and I leaned against the wall. I told myself not to panic. That was the cruelest part. Even before anyone said it, I was already accusing myself of overreacting. I counted backward from 10. I loosened the collar of my blouse. I placed one hand over my chest and waited for the sensation to pass. It did not. Instead, my heartbeat stumbled again, so sharply that I gasped. My mother appeared at the end of the hallway. For 1 second, I felt relieved. "Mum," I said. "Something feels wrong." She glanced over her shoulder toward the ballroom. Grant had started his thank you speech. "Can this wait?" she whispered. I don't think so. She moved closer, but her expression was not worried. It was irritated. What is it now? I hated the way that question made me feel guilty before I had even answered. My heart is racing. I'm dizzy and I can't catch my breath. She sighed. You're probably overwhelmed. There are a lot of people here. No, this feels different. Audra, please don't start. She said it softly, almost kindly, which somehow made it worse. I stared at her. I'm not starting anything. Grant is in the middle of speaking. I know. My voice shook. I'm trying not to interrupt. I just need help. She looked at me for another second, then reached out and pressed the back of her hand to my forehead as if that single gesture could settle the question. You're not feverish. That's not what I said. Her mouth tightened. Go sit in the lounge. Drink some water. You'll feel better. I wanted to obey. That was the habit she had trained into me. If Audra Whitlock said something was minor, the whole family treated it as minor. She had always been the person who decided what everyone else was allowed to feel. My father's anger became stress. Grant's selfishness became ambition. My discomfort became sensitivity. I tried to take one step toward the lounge, but my legs did not cooperate. I caught myself against the wall. My mother finally reached for my elbow. Honestly, Audra. There was embarrassment in her voice now. People are going to notice. Let them notice. The words came out before I could stop them. Her eyes narrowed. I had broken an old rule. We did not draw attention to unpleasant things in public. We hid them until they became private enough to deny. I pulled my phone from my bag, but my fingers felt numb. The screen slipped against my palm. I think I need someone to call an ambulance. My mother gave a short laugh of disbelief. An ambulance. I can't breathe. You are breathing. Not right. You always do this, she said. Something gets stressful, and suddenly it becomes an emergency. The ballroom doors opened behind her, and Grant stepped into the hallway, still holding his champagne glass. What's going on? He asked. My mother answered before I could. Your sister is overwhelmed. Grant looked at me and rolled his eyes. Tonight? Seriously. I'm not doing this on purpose. Nobody said you were. His tone said exactly the opposite. He walked closer, lowering his voice. Dad finally gets one good night, and you have to make it about you. A hot pressure rose behind my eyes. I am asking for help, not attention. Same difference with you. My mother told him not to be cruel, but she said it with a smile. That tiny smile made him grin. A few relatives had started drifting toward the hallway. My father joined them, still wearing the gold birthday pin Grant had bought him. He took one look at me against the wall and frowned. What happened? She thinks she needs an ambulance, Grant said. Someone behind him laughed. It was quiet at first. Then another person gave a nervous chuckle. My mother shook her head as if I had told an absurd joke. She's overreacting. That word passed through the small crowd like permission. A cousin muttered that I had always been dramatic. An aunt told me to sit down before I embarrassed myself. Grant took a sip from his glass and said, Can we not turn this into the Audra show? I tried to answer, but the hallway tilted again. My chest felt tighter now, and the light above me flickered at the edge of my vision. I reached for my mother's arm. Please? I whispered. Call someone. She looked down at my hand, then back at the guests watching us. Instead of fear, I saw annoyance. Instead of concern, I saw the familiar calculation of how my problem might affect the family's image. She pulled her arm away. Stop overreacting, she said. You're embarrassing everyone. Then my hearing faded, my knees gave out, and the last thing I saw before the floor rushed toward me was my family standing in a half-circle, waiting for me to prove I was faking. I did not lose consciousness completely. I remember the floor against my knees, the cold bite of tile through my stockings, and the strange silence that followed after everyone realized I had actually fallen. For a few seconds, no one moved. Then voices overlapped. Someone said I needed air. Someone else said I had probably locked my knees. My mother crouched beside me, but even then she was still speaking to the room instead of to me. She's had panic spells before, she said. That was not true. I had never been diagnosed with panic attacks. I had never even told her I thought I had them, but once Audra Whitlock gave an explanation, everyone treated it like fact. I tried to push myself upright. My arms trembled so badly that I could not support my weight. "Call 911, I said. The words came out broken and thin. Grant stepped closer, looking more annoyed than afraid. "You don't need an ambulance." I stared at him. "I can't breathe. You're talking." "Grant," I managed, "please." He glanced toward the ballroom, where music had started playing again. "We're not bringing an ambulance into Dad's party because you got overwhelmed." My father stood behind him, jaw tight. "Let's get her into the lounge," he said. "Somewhere private." Private. That was what mattered. Not whether I was safe, whether the guests had to see it. 2 relatives reached for me, but Jonah Pierce pushed through the small crowd before they could move me. Jonah had known my father for years. He was not family, but he had been at enough birthdays and holiday dinners to know our patterns. He knelt beside me and asked, "Audra, can you look at me?" I tried. His face blurred, then sharpened again. "Her lips are turning blue," he said. My mother immediately shook her head. "It's the lighting." Jonah ignored her. He pressed 2 fingers to my wrist and looked at his watch. His expression changed. "Her pulse is all over the place." My father stepped forward. "Jonah, don't make this worse." "I'm not making anything worse." Jonah pulled out his phone. "She needs medical attention." Grant reached for his arm. "You're seriously calling emergency services?" Jonah looked at him with a kind of disgust I had never seen anyone direct at my brother. "Yes." He moved away before Grant could stop him and gave the dispatcher the address. The moment he said, "Possible cardiac event," the room changed. A few guests backed away. Someone turned off the music. My mother stood and smoothed the front of her dress, as if she were the one being inconvenienced. "This is ridiculous," she muttered. I was still on the floor. Jonah sat beside me and kept his voice steady. "Help is coming." I wanted to thank him, but breathing had become work. Every inhale felt shallow. My heartbeat seemed to slam against my ribs, pause, then race again. I closed my eyes because the ceiling lights made the dizziness worse. Around me, my family kept arguing. Grant said Jonah had overreacted. My mother said the neighbors would see the ambulance. My father asked whether they could meet the paramedics outside. Not one of them asked me what I was feeling. When the first responders arrived, Jonah led them straight to me. A paramedic named Elena knelt at my side and attached a monitor while her partner asked questions. "Any history of heart problems?" "No," my mother answered. Elena looked past her. I asked the patient. That sentence should not have felt revolutionary, but it did. "I don't know," I said. "Sometimes my heart races. Never like this." "Chest pain? Pressure? Shortness of breath?" I nodded. "Dizziness?" "Yes." Elena checked the monitor, and her expression became focused. She called out numbers to her partner, who opened a medical bag. My mother leaned closer. "She gets anxious in crowds." Elena did not look up. "Anxiety does not explain everything we're seeing." Grant folded his arms. "So what are you seeing?" "We're evaluating her." The answer was firm enough to silence him. They placed oxygen under my nose and helped me onto a stretcher. The hall seemed longer than before as they wheeled me toward the entrance. Guests lined both sides, pretending not to stare. I saw the abandoned champagne glasses, the half-cut cake, the gold decorations my mother had spent weeks choosing. For a split second, guilt hit me. I had ruined the party. Then another wave of pressure moved through my chest, and I remembered I had begged them for help. They had chosen the party. Outside, the evening air felt cool against my face. My mother followed the stretcher, still explaining. "She's always been sensitive. She probably got worked up because of the crowd." Elena stopped walking. "Ma'am, please let us focus." My mother looked offended. "I'm her mother." "And she is an adult." That silenced her. At the ambulance, one of the paramedics asked who was coming with me. No one answered immediately. Grant looked back toward the venue. My father checked his phone. My mother sighed like she had been given an unpleasant chore. I suppose I will. I heard myself say, no. Everyone looked at me. My voice was weak, but the word came clearly. I want Jonah to come. Jonah's eyes widened. My mother's face hardened. Audra, don't be dramatic. Even then. Even while I was strapped to a stretcher with oxygen under my nose, she used the same word. Jonah climbed into the ambulance without arguing. The doors closed before she could say more. On the ride to the hospital, the monitor beside me kept sounding irregular alarms. Jonah sat near my feet, pale and quiet. I'm sorry, I whispered. For what? For causing all this. He stared at me. You did not cause this. The paramedic adjusting my IV glanced at me. People who are actually in trouble apologize a lot, she said. You don't need to. I turned my face toward the window because I did not want them to see me cry. At the emergency department, everything moved fast. Blood, tests, electrodes, questions, a chest X-ray, another monitor. By the time my family arrived, I had been placed in a curtained room and was waiting for a physician. My mother came in first. You frightened everyone, she said. Not, are you all right? Not, I'm sorry. You frightened everyone. Grant stood behind her and asked how long this would take. My father said the party had ended early because guests felt uncomfortable staying. I lay there listening to them describe the consequences to everyone except me. I asked you to call for help, I said. My mother crossed her arms. And help came? Because Jonah called? You're here now, aren't you? Before I could answer, a doctor stepped through the curtain. He introduced himself as Jodar. Elias Mercer then looked at the monitor, the printed egg, and the first set of lab results. He stopped speaking. The room grew quiet. He studied the tracing again, this time more slowly. My mother gave a nervous laugh. She was under a lot of stress tonight. We think it was probably anxiety. Dr. Mercer raised his eyes to her. Who told you that? It's obvious. No, he said. It isn't. He turned toward me and pulled a chair closer to the bed. Audra, I need you to answer a few questions carefully. My mother started to speak again, but he held up one hand without looking away from me. I need to hear from her. He asked how long I had experienced palpitations, whether I had ever fainted, whether exercise made me unusually tired, and whether anyone in my family had heart problems. I answered as honestly as I could. A few episodes, nothing serious, no diagnosis. My father shifted near the curtain when the doctor asked about family history. I noticed it, but I was too tired to understand why. Dida. Mercer looked back at the edge. This is not a panic attack, he said. Grant scoffed softly. Then what is it? Dr. Mercer did not answer him immediately. He looked at me instead. Your heart rhythm is abnormal, and I don't believe this started tonight. The room went completely still. Then he asked the question that made my father lower his eyes. Has anyone in your family ever had serious heart disease? I had spent my entire life believing my body was unreliable. That belief began falling apart the moment Jodar. Elias Mercer pulled his chair closer to my hospital bed instead of walking away after reading my chart. My parents had always spoken with certainty whenever I said something felt wrong. They never sounded cruel. They sounded confident. That was what made it so convincing. Every headache was stress. Every dizzy spell was dehydration. Every racing heartbeat was anxiety. After enough years, I stopped asking whether they were right. I simply assumed they were. Now, for the first time, someone with actual medical training was looking at me as if my body had been trying to tell me the truth for years. The room stayed quiet after his question. Has anyone in your family ever had serious heart disease? My father looked toward the floor. My mother answered before anyone else could. No one has anything unusual. Jita. Mercer didn't even write that down. Instead, he looked directly at me. Audra. I swallowed. My grandfather died pretty young. How old? 46, I think. Jetta Mercer nodded slowly. Do you know why? They always said it was sudden. I looked toward my father. Dead. Howard hesitated. It was a heart problem. My mother shot him a sharp look. Howard, that was decades ago. Dr. Mercer remained calm. What kind of heart problem? My father rubbed the back of his neck. I don't remember the medical term. That answer felt strange. My father remembered everything. Birthdays, license plate numbers, baseball statistics from the 1980s. Yet suddenly he couldn't remember the illness that had killed his own father before turning 50. Dr. Mercer asked another question. Have you ever been evaluated by a cardiologist, Mr. Whitlock? My father's shoulders stiffened. Years ago. I turned toward him. You saw a heart specialist. It wasn't a big deal. Dad. Just routine. Dr. Mercer leaned back in his chair. Do you currently take any cardiac medication? My father looked trapped. There was no point lying. I had seen him take pills every morning since I was a teenager. Wes. My mother sighed loudly. His blood pressure. Judah. Mercer glanced at the medication list one of the nurses had already entered after checking Howard's emergency contact information. Actually, he said carefully, this medication isn't prescribed for high blood pressure alone. My father's face lost color. I felt another kind of dizziness, one that had nothing to do with my heart. Dad, I whispered. What haven't you told me? Before he could answer, Dr. Mercer stood. I'd like to order an echocardiogram and a cardiac MRI. I also want genetic screening discussed once we've stabilized your rhythm. My mother frowned. Genetic screening. Isn't that excessive? He folded his arms. Not if I'm considering an inherited condition. The word inherited echoed in my head long after he left the room. My mother immediately tried to smooth everything over. Doctors always assume the worst first. Grant nodded. They're covering themselves. I looked at them and wondered why they seemed more interested in minimizing the doctor's concern than understanding it. He said this might run in families. My mother forced a smile. That doesn't mean anything yet. Then why did Dad freeze when he asked about heart disease? No one answered. Instead, Grant changed the subject. The party was a disaster. I stared at him. That's what you're thinking about? I'm saying none of this would have happened if you'd gone home when you started feeling stressed. I almost laughed because it was unbelievable. Even after hearing a cardiologist dismiss the anxiety theory, my brother still couldn't let it go. Grant, I said quietly. I wasn't stressed. I was scared. You always say that afterward. Something inside me cracked, not dramatically, quietly, like an old piece of glass finally giving way after years of pressure. I realized he wasn't ignoring me because he hated me. He genuinely believed the version of me our parents had taught him to believe. The dramatic sister, the emotional one, the one who always made small problems bigger. That story had become our family's truth. A nurse entered to take more blood. My mother stepped into the hallway to answer a phone call. Through the partly open curtain, I heard her telling someone, "They're just being cautious. Just being cautious." I looked at Jonah, who had stayed longer than anyone else. He sat quietly in the corner reading emails on his phone so I wouldn't feel alone. "Thank you," I said. He smiled gently. "You don't have to keep thanking me. You believed me. Audra." He hesitated before continuing. "When I saw your face tonight, I knew something wasn't right. My family didn't. Sometimes the people closest to us stop seeing what's actually in front of them." His words stayed with me after he left. Around midnight, the hospital grew quieter. My parents finally went home because visiting hours ended. Grant left first. He said he had meetings in the morning. My mother kissed my forehead before leaving, but even that felt rehearsed. "Try to rest," she said. "You'll feel silly about all this tomorrow." That sentence kept me awake for another hour. What if she was right? What if every test came back normal? What if I had destroyed my father's birthday over nothing? I hated that those questions still came before concern for my own health. At around 1 in the morning, Dr. Mercer returned with preliminary results. He carried a tablet instead of a paper chart. He sat down again instead of standing over me. Your heart rhythm has stabilized for now, he said. That's good, good, I repeated. But, he smiled slightly. You noticed the but? I've worked with auditors for 10 years. Fair enough. He turned the screen toward me. There was an image of my heart I didn't understand. There are some structural findings I don't want to ignore. They're subtle, but they're there. I looked at the blurry shapes without knowing what I was seeing. Am I going to die? The question came out before I could stop it. Not tonight. He answered immediately. And that's exactly why we're investigating this now instead of waiting until something worse happens. My shoulders relaxed a little. So what do you think this is? I think you've probably been living with this for a long time. Without knowing? Yes. Wouldn't someone have noticed? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he asked another question. Growing up, were you ever told you tired more easily than other children? I blinked. Actually, yes. Did you avoid sports? Mostly because I couldn't keep up. Episodes of dizziness? Sometimes. Rapid heartbeat. Every now and then, he nodded after each answer as though pieces of a puzzle were falling into place. Those symptoms can be easy to dismiss individually. Together, they tell a different story. I felt sick for an entirely different reason. I've had this for years. Possibly. And nobody knew? Jada? Mercer rested his elbows on his knees. Maybe nobody recognized the pattern. He paused. Or maybe nobody connected it. Then he asked the question that changed everything. Audra, has anyone in your family ever undergone genetic heart screening? I frowned. Not that I know of. Are you certain? Why? He looked down at my chart before meeting my eyes again. Because conditions like the one I'm beginning to suspect often lead physicians to recommend screening for immediate family members. My stomach tightened. Immediate family. Parents, children, siblings. I stared at the ceiling. My grandfather had died young. My father took heart medication every day. Yet somehow I had never once sat in a cardiologist's office until tonight. Think, Juice de Mercer said softly. There are parts of your family's medical history that you haven't been told. I reached for my phone after he left. My thumb hovered over my contacts for several seconds before stopping on one name I hadn't spoken to in almost a year. My Aunt Celeste. She was my father's younger sister and the only person in our family who had never fully accepted my mother's version of reality. It was almost 2 a.m. I knew I shouldn't call, but something deep inside me whispered that if anyone knew the truth about my grandfather, it would be her. I stared at my aunt's name for almost a full minute before pressing the call button. At 2 a.m, there were only 2 possibilities. Either she would ignore the call, or something important had happened. She answered before the second ring. Audra. Her voice was thick with sleep, but the concern in it was immediate. Are you okay? I had not realized how badly I needed someone to ask me that question until I heard it. My throat tightened. I'm in the hospital. There was a long pause. What happened? I collapsed during Dad's birthday party. Collapsed. The doctors think I have some kind of inherited heart condition. Silence filled the line. Not confused silence, recognizing silence. Aunt Celeste, I asked quietly. You knew that word would come up someday, didn't you? She exhaled slowly. Audra, what exactly did the doctors tell you? They said it might run in families. Another pause. Then she asked a question that made every hair on my arms stand up. Did they say whether your father had ever been diagnosed with anything? I sat up straighter in the hospital bed. Dad has been diagnosed. Howard never told you. He told us he took medication for blood pressure. My aunt made a sound somewhere between disbelief and disappointment. No, she whispered. It wasn't just blood pressure. My heartbeat sped up again, and the monitor beside my bed chirped louder. A nurse glanced through the glass door, but I raised a hand to let her know I was all right. Please, I said into the phone. Tell me everything. Celeste spoke slowly, carefully, almost as though she regretted every sentence before she finished saying it. After your grandfather died, your father started seeing a cardiologist in his early 40s. They discovered he had inherited the same condition that likely caused your grandfather's death. I closed my eyes. Never told me. I assumed he had. No. My voice cracked. I never said a word. She sighed. Your father didn't like talking about it. It scared him. That explanation made sense. What came next did not. But the doctors also recommended that every biological child be evaluated. I stopped breathing for a second. What? It was standard advice. They wanted the family screened. All the children? Wise. My fingers tightened around the phone so hard they hurt. I was never tested. The silence that followed lasted longer this time. Finally Celeste spoke again, but her voice had completely changed. Wait. I've never seen a cardiologist before tonight. That can't be right. It is. No. She sounded genuinely shaken. Howard and Marianne told everyone both of you had been checked. My stomach dropped. Both. Yes. I felt as though the room had become too small. Grant was checked. Of course he was. How do you know? Who was playing football in high school? Celeste answered without hesitation. Your parents were worried strenuous sports might be dangerous if he'd inherited the condition. I stared at the wall across from my bed. Every word she spoke felt like another brick falling from a wall I had trusted my entire life. What about me? I whispered. I don't know. Her voice was almost as quiet as mine. I honestly believed they had taken you too. Nobody ever did. Audra? Nobody. Tears slipped down my face before I realized I was crying. My aunt did not rush to fill the silence. She let me breathe through it. Finally she asked, do you remember when your father started going to specialist appointments? I nodded even though she could not see me. I remember he missed work every few months. Those were follow-up visits. Mum always said they were routine physicals. No. I looked toward the hallway where nurses quietly walked from room to room. Everything suddenly seemed divided into two categories. Things my family had told me. Things that were actually true. I wasn't sure how many belonged in each category anymore. Why wouldn't they tell me? I asked. Celeste hesitated. I don't know. Did they ever talk about me? Not like that? Please don't protect them. She sighed heavily. Your mother used to say you worried too much. I laughed bitterly through my tears. Of course she did. She believed giving you too much medical information would only make you anxious. So instead she gave me none. Audra. She let me think I was imagining everything. Celeste did not argue. She couldn't. Around 8 the next morning, Juiced Mercer returned carrying fresh test results. I barely slept after talking to my aunt. My mind had replayed the conversation over and over again until sunrise. The first thing I said when he entered the room was, My father has the condition you're looking for, doesn't he? He paused. Who told you that? My aunt. He pulled the chair closer again. We've requested your father's records, but yes, based on what you've told me, that seems very possible. She also said every child should have been screened. He looked at me carefully. That would generally be the recommendation. Then why wasn't I? He didn't answer immediately. Doctors are trained not to speculate. I don't know what conversations happened inside your family, he said. But I can tell you this. He folded his hands together. If a parent has a confirmed inherited cardiac condition, physicians usually recommend evaluating all biological children, not because they expect every child to have it, because they don't want to miss the one who does. I swallowed hard. I've spent years thinking I was weak. You're not weak. I thought I couldn't handle stress. Your heart was giving you warning signs. And everyone. My voice faded. Drida, Mercer finished the sentence gently. Explained those signs away. He wasn't accusing my parents. He was stating a fact. Somehow that made it even more painful. Around noon my father arrived alone. He looked older than he had 2 days earlier. His shoulders were lower. His eyes were bloodshot. He stood near the doorway for several seconds before speaking. "How are you feeling?" "Better than yesterday." "That's good." Neither of us mentioned the real reason he had come. Finally, I broke the silence. "Dead?" "Yeah." "Why didn't you tell me?" His face tightened immediately. "Tell you what?" "About your heart." He looked toward the window instead of at me. It wasn't something I liked talking about. "That's not what I'm asking." He remained silent. "Did your doctor tell you to have Grant and me tested?" My father closed his eyes, just for a second, but it was enough. "Dead." He sat down slowly. "Yes," the word was barely audible. "He did." I felt as if every machine in the room had suddenly become louder. "Then why was Grant tested?" I struggled to finish the sentence. "And I wasn't." He rubbed both hands across his face. "Your mother thought?" "No." I interrupted him for the first time in my life. "Don't tell me what Mom thought." He looked up, surprised. "I'm asking what you did." He didn't answer. He couldn't. Because for the first time, neither of us could pretend his silence had been harmless. Before either of us spoke again, the door opened. Marianne walked into the room, carrying flowers and coffee, completely unaware that the lie she'd protected for years had finally started to collapse. The flowers my mother carried looked expensive. White orchids. My favorite. Under different circumstances, I might have believed they were an apology. Instead, they felt like another carefully chosen prop. Marianne had always known how to create the appearance of care. She remembered birthdays, mailed handwritten Christmas cards, and never forgot to send soup when someone caught the flu. People described her as thoughtful, organized, devoted. They never saw the version of her that decided which truths were convenient enough to tell and which ones were better left buried. She placed the flowers on the windowsill before looking at either of us. "How's my girl?" she asked with a practiced smile. I looked at my father instead. "Finish answering the question." My mother's smile faded. "What question?" I didn't take my eyes off Howard. Why was Grant tested? And I wasn't. My father inhaled slowly but said nothing. Marianne stepped between us. "Howard, the doctor said Audra needs to avoid stress." "Mom, this isn't the time." "It's exactly the time." She folded her arms. "You're recovering. We can discuss family history after you're home." I've spent 32 years waiting for that conversation. My voice stayed calm, but inside I felt something shifting. A week earlier I would have accepted the delay. I would have convinced myself that she was right. Now I recognized the pattern. Delay long enough, and eventually everyone became too tired to ask questions. Dieter Mercer had not taught me medicine. He had taught me something much more valuable. He had listened without dismissing me. Once someone does that, it becomes much harder to accept being ignored again. My father cleared his throat. "Marianne." She turned toward him immediately. "Not now." It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but I noticed something I had never paid attention to before. Howard stopped talking the instant she spoke, not because she had a better argument. Because that was how their marriage worked. My mother directed, my father complied. "Dead," I said quietly. "Please." He looked exhausted. "Grant had started playing varsity football," he said. "The cardiologist thought high-intensity sports made screening more urgent." "Hand me?" He rubbed his forehead. "You weren't involved in athletics." "So we thought." His voice trailed away. Marianne answered instead. "You were healthy." I almost laughed. "Healthy? You had no serious symptoms." "I nearly fainted in college. From dehydration." "You don't know that." The doctor at the urgent care said. "He never ran cardiac tests." My mother frowned. Because he didn't think they were necessary, or because nobody told him Grandpa died of a heart condition. The room became very quiet. Marianne looked genuinely surprised. "Who told you about your grandfather?" "Aunt Celeste." My mother's jaw tightened. She had no business discussing private medical information. "Private," I repeated. "It was my family's medical history. That doesn't mean every detail needed to frighten you." There it was, Not denial. Justification. So you knew? Ooh, we made the best decision we could. By not telling me? You were always anxious. No. I shook my head slowly. I became anxious because every time something felt wrong, everyone told me I was imagining it. She opened her mouth to respond, but there was a knock on the door. Dieter Mercer stepped inside carrying a folder. He immediately sensed the tension. Am I interrupting? Actually, I said. Your timing is perfect. He glanced between my parents and me before setting the folder on the bedside table. I received additional records this morning. My father's shoulders stiffened. My mother looked away. Dr. Mercer opened the folder. Or Mr. Whitlock, thank you for authorizing release of your previous cardiology reports. I turned toward my father in surprise. He had signed the release. He gave a small nod without meeting my eyes. I figured, he swallowed. There wasn't much point hiding them anymore. Dr. Mercer continued carefully. Your father's diagnosis was confirmed nearly 12 years ago. 12 years. I was 20 when he learned he carried an inherited heart condition. The consulting cardiologist documented a recommendation that immediate family members be evaluated. My mother interrupted. Recommendations aren't always mandatory. Dr. Mercer nodded politely. That's true, he looked at me. But they are made because early detection often changes long-term outcomes. My stomach tightened. If I'd been tested, he answered honestly. There's no way to know exactly when changes first appeared, but we likely would have monitored you over the years. I stared at the blanket covering my legs. Years of annual checkups. Years of understanding my own body. Years of not apologizing every time my heart raced unexpectedly. My mother leaned forward. Audra, please don't do this to yourself. I looked at her. Do what? Write your entire life around one diagnosis. I'm not rewriting anything. My voice remained steady. I'm reading the version nobody let me see. She looked offended by that sentence. You make it sound like we were hiding something. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I asked Dr. Mercer, would families usually be given written information after a diagnosis like my father's? Yes, he replied. Most practices provide educational materials explaining inheritance risks and screening recommendations. I turned back toward my parents. Did you get those? My father slowly nodded. My mother looked at him sharply. Howard, don't. His voice surprised all of us. It wasn't loud, but it carried a firmness I hadn't heard in years. Enough. Marianne blinked. Excuse me. Enough pretending we don't remember. The silence that followed felt heavier than any argument. My father reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and removed an old envelope. It was worn along the edges, folded so many times that the paper had begun to soften. I found this in the filing cabinet this morning. He handed it to me with trembling fingers. Across the top was the logo of the cardiology clinic. My name was nowhere on the first page. My father's was. The letter summarized his diagnosis. Halfway down, one paragraph had been highlighted in yellow. Because this condition may be inherited, evaluation of all biological children is strongly recommended. I read the sentence 3 times before I trusted my own eyes. At the bottom corner of the page, someone had written a note in blue ink. The handwriting was unmistakably my mother's. Grant scheduled for June, Audra later. Just 2 words, Audra later. I felt my chest tighten again. Not from illness this time, but from grief. Later. I whispered. What happened to later? Neither of my parents answered. My father covered his face with one hand. My mother looked at the window instead of at me. I traced the faded blue ink with my fingertip. Later. Such a harmless word. It didn't say never. It didn't say unimportant. It simply postponed me until life became less busy, until Grant's future was secure, until my father recovered, until my mother's calendar was less full. Then another month passed, then another year. Eventually everyone forgot, except the paper. The paper had remembered for 12 years. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back inside the envelope. I'm taking this with me, I said. Marianne finally looked at me again. Audra? No. I held up my hand. I'm done accepting explanations without evidence. Jada. Mercer watched quietly from the corner of the room. He wasn't part of our family. He didn't need to be. Simply having one person who refused to let the truth be minimized changed the balance of the entire conversation. My phone buzzed on the bedside table. It was a text from Tessa. "How are you holding up?" I looked at the envelope in my hands before replying with 4 simple words. "I found the proof." Less than a minute later, another message appeared. "Then don't let anyone convince you it never happened." Finding proof should have felt like winning. Instead, it felt like standing in the middle of a house after discovering the foundation had been cracked for years. Nothing collapsed immediately. Every wall still stood. Every room looked familiar. But I could no longer trust anything that had once made me feel safe. I was discharged from the hospital 3 days later with a folder full of prescriptions, follow-up appointments, dietary recommendations, and strict instructions not to ignore any future symptoms. Dr. Mercer walked me to the exit himself. "Your condition is manageable," he said, "but only if you stop doubting your body every time it asks for help." I smiled weakly. That might take longer than the medication. Healing usually does. Before I left, he handed me one final document. It summarized my diagnosis in plain language instead of complicated medical terminology. At the bottom, he had written a single sentence by hand. "Trust the evidence, including the evidence your own body gives you." I folded the paper carefully and slipped it into my bag beside the old cardiology letter from my father's file. Somehow, those 2 documents belonged together. One represented 12 years of silence. The other represented the first person who had ever interrupted it. Tessa picked me up from the hospital. She didn't bombard me with questions during the drive home. She simply carried my overnight bag upstairs, stocked my refrigerator with groceries, and made tea without asking how I wanted it. "You already remembered the honey," I said, surprised. She shrugged. "You always take honey when your throat hurts." I laughed quietly. "You pay more attention than my own family." She looked at me for a long moment before answering. "People usually notice the things they believe matter." That sentence stayed with me all evening. 3 days later, I spread every document across my dining table. Tax returns, insurance papers, appointment summaries, the old letter from my father's cardiologist, my discharge paperwork. As a financial analyst, I spent my career looking for patterns inside numbers. Family history, I realized, worked the same way. Facts mattered more than assumptions. Dates mattered more than feelings. I opened my laptop and created a spreadsheet. One column listed medical events. Another listed family conversations. A third listed what I had actually been told. Within an hour, contradictions began appearing everywhere. Howard's diagnosis 12 years ago. Recommendation for screening same month. Grant's cardiology appointment 3 weeks later. My appointment none. Marianne telling Aunt Celeste that the children were cleared 6 months after Grant's testing. I stared at the screen. She hadn't simply forgotten. She had replaced reality with a version that was easier to remember. My phone rang. Marianne. I let it go to voicemail. She called again 15 minutes later. Then again that evening. On the 4th attempt, I answered. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Recovering. Good." A pause. "Your father and I think it's time we move forward." I looked at the spreadsheet glowing on my laptop. Forward. There's no reason to keep digging through old records. Actually, there is. Audra. She used the same patient tone she had used my entire life. "Dwelling on the past won't help your heart. Understanding the past might." Silence. "Celeste is making this much worse than it needs to be. She didn't create the documents. She doesn't understand the pressure we were under." "What pressure?" "Your father had just received frightening news. Grant's football scholarship depended on medical clearance. Everything happened at once. So I became later." She sighed. "That's not fair." "No," I agreed quietly. It wasn't. She changed tactics. "Your cousins have been asking questions." "Have they?" "People don't need to know every family matter." Then maybe don't tell them things that aren't true. Another long silence. Finally she said, "You're making us sound like terrible parents." I closed my eyes. "Mom, I'm not making you sound like anything. I'm reading what you wrote." I could almost hear her struggling to regain control of the conversation. "You don't understand what those notes meant. Then explain them." "Not over the phone." "Okay. We'll come by tomorrow." "No." She hesitated. "No. If we're going to talk, we're doing it somewhere neutral. Audra. And not until Dad is ready to answer questions, too." She hung up without saying goodbye. That alone told me more than any argument could have. The next morning Celeste arrived carrying 2 old storage boxes. "I cleaned out my attic," she explained. "I thought there might be something useful." Inside were family photo albums, Christmas letters, and several folders of paperwork she had accidentally taken home after helping my grandparents move years earlier. Most of it had nothing to do with my situation. Then, halfway through the second folder, I found a folded newsletter from the cardiology clinic. Tucked inside it was a photocopy of an email addressed to my father and mother. Subject line: family screening recommendations. My hands started shaking. The email summarized exactly what Dr. Mercer had already explained. Every biological child should receive an evaluation. The message ended with a sentence I hadn't seen before: "If one child has already been tested, please remember that a normal result in one sibling does not eliminate risk in another." I looked at Celeste. Grant's result didn't mean I was safe. "No. They knew that." She nodded slowly. "Apparently." There was no dramatic revelation, no confession hidden inside the email. Just one clear sentence destroying every explanation my mother had offered. Later that afternoon, Howard came by alone. He looked exhausted. "Your mother doesn't know I'm here," he admitted. I invited him inside anyway. We sat at opposite ends of the dining table where my spreadsheet remained open. He studied it quietly. "You organized everything. It's easier to understand this way. Looks like one of your financial reports. Facts don't get offended." He gave a sad smile. "No." I slid the printed email toward him. "Did you read this 12 years ago?" He nodded almost immediately. "Yes." "Then why did you let Mom tell everyone Grant's test covered both of us?" Howard rubbed his eyes. "Because I wanted to believe she'd remember to schedule yours later." "And when she didn't?" He looked down at his hands. "The years passed." "Dad." My voice cracked. "Years don't just pass." He nodded slowly. "I know that now." "No," I whispered. "You know it because I survived." Tears filled his eyes for the first time since all this had started. "You're right." Neither of us spoke for a while. Finally he said something I never expected to hear. "I spent 12 years calling my silence patience." He looked around my apartment before continuing. "It was cowardice." I believed him, not because it erased anything, but because it was the first honest sentence he had spoken without hiding behind my mother. Before leaving, he placed his house key on the table. "Your mother still has some of your records in the office cabinet," he said quietly. "Take whatever belongs to you." "Will she let me?" "She doesn't have to." He stood. "I've already told her the cabinet is yours to open." For the first time since leaving the hospital, I realized something important. My mother still believed she was controlling the story. She had no idea the evidence was already speaking for itself, and once facts begin telling the truth, they become impossible to silence. I drove to my parents' house the following Saturday with a folder on the passenger seat that was far thicker than the one I had carried home from the hospital. It contained copies of my father's cardiology records, the recommendation for family screening, the email reminding my parents that one child's normal results did not eliminate another child's risk, my own hospital reports, and a simple timeline I had printed from the spreadsheet on my laptop. I had no dramatic speech planned. I had no intention of humiliating anyone. I was done arguing over memories. Facts were enough. Howard opened the front door before I reached it. He looked nervous, almost relieved that I had actually come. There in the dining room, he said quietly. Who's here? Your mother? Grant. Celeste came too. I hadn't invited Celeste, but I wasn't surprised she had come. She had spent too many years watching uncomfortable truths disappear inside this family. This time she wanted to see one remain. I walked into the dining room where countless birthdays, Christmas dinners, and Thanksgiving meals had taken place over the years. The room looked exactly the same. The people inside it did not. Marianne sat perfectly upright with her hands folded on the table. Grant leaned back in his chair, avoiding eye contact. Celeste offered me a small, encouraging smile. Nobody reached for a hug. Nobody asked how I was feeling. Somehow, that no longer hurt as much as it once would have. I placed the folder in the middle of the table. I'm not here to fight, I said. I'm here because this conversation should have happened 12 years ago. Marianne sighed immediately. Audra, we've apologized for upsetting you. I looked at her calmly. No, you've apologized that I was upset. That's different, she frowned. You're twisting my words. Then let's use written ones instead. I opened the folder and slid the first document toward everyone. It was the recommendation from my father's cardiologist. Howard didn't touch it. He had already read it again 2 days earlier. Grant picked it up first. His eyes moved across the highlighted paragraph, evaluation of all biological children. He stopped reading aloud. I never knew this existed. Neither did I answered. Until last week. Marianne folded her arms. We already explained that Grant's screening was considered more urgent because of football. Urgent? I repeated. Not exclusive. She remained silent. I placed the second document on the table. The email from the clinic. Grant read that one too. When he reached the final sentence, he looked up at our parents in confusion. It literally says my results didn't clear Audra. No one answered him. Celeste finally spoke. That's because they never did. My mother looked at her sharply. You weren't involved in our medical decisions. No, Celeste replied. But I was involved every time you told the rest of us that both children had been checked. Marianne's expression changed almost imperceptibly. I remembered it differently. I shook my head. No, Mom. I reached into the folder again and removed the copy of the handwritten note. Grant scheduled for June. Audra later. I laid it beside the email. You didn't remember differently. My voice remained calm. You planned differently. The room fell silent. Grant picked up the note and stared at it for several seconds. That's your handwriting. Marianne looked at the paper without touching it. I was organizing appointments. Then where was mine? I asked. Life happened. No. I shook my head. Life doesn't erase one appointment for 12 years. Howard finally spoke. His voice was barely above a whisper. She's right. Marianne turned toward him in disbelief. Howard? She's right. He looked at me instead of his wife. I should have followed up. My mother leaned forward. We had so much going on. Howard had just been diagnosed. Grant was trying to keep his scholarship. You were healthy. I held her gaze. You keep saying I was healthy. I slid my hospital report across the table. The cardiologist believes I've had warning signs for years. No one could have known. The doctor who wrote these recommendations certainly thought someone should look. She opened her mouth, but couldn't find another explanation. For the first time in my life, my mother looked uncertain. Grant slowly set the papers back on the table. Mum. His voice sounded completely different from the confident man at Dad's birthday party. Did you really think one test covered both of us? Marianne rubbed her forehead. I thought. She stopped. I thought if your results were normal. Grant interrupted gently. The email literally says they don't. She looked down. I know that now. You knew it then, I said quietly. It was written in front of you. No one spoke. The silence stretched until Howard finally broke it. Marianne. She looked at him, almost pleading. Say something. He took a deep breath. I've spent the last week trying to convince myself this was an accident. He paused. It wasn't. Tears appeared in Marianne's eyes. I never wanted Audra to get hurt. I believe you. I answered honestly. I don't think you wanted me to get hurt. She looked relieved for a fraction of a second, then I finished the sentence. You just kept deciding that something else mattered more. Her face crumpled. That was the first moment I saw genuine pain instead of defensiveness. Grant had opportunities, she whispered. He was playing sports. Colleges were watching him. Your father had just received terrifying news. I thought. You thought I could wait? I said. She nodded slowly. Yes. The room felt impossibly quiet. Grant leaned back in his chair and covered his mouth with one hand. You never told me any of this. You were young? I was 20, he replied. Not 5. He looked at me with tears in his eyes. Audra, I made fun of you that night. I nodded. I know. I called you dramatic. I know. I thought. He couldn't finish the sentence. You believed what you were taught, I said. That doesn't erase it. But I understand it. Grant looked at our parents again. Every time she said something was wrong, we laughed. Nobody argued with him. There was nothing left to argue about. Marianne reached across the table toward me. Please, she whispered. I know I can't change what happened, but don't walk away from this family. I looked at her hand. Then at the papers spread across the table. 12 years of postponement, one terrible night, a lifetime of being told not to trust myself. Mom, I said softly, I'm not walking away because of one decision. I met her eyes. I'm walking away because every time I tried to tell you something was wrong, you taught me not to believe myself. Tears rolled down her face. I never meant to do that. Intent doesn't change the outcome. I stood and carefully placed every document back into the folder except one. The handwritten note remained on the table. Keep it, I said. Not because I want to punish you. My voice remained steady. Because I don't ever want anyone in this house to forget how easy it is to write the word later, when it belongs to someone else's life. I picked up my bag and walked toward the front door. My mother called my name once. I didn't stop. My father didn't ask me to. Grant followed me outside. Will I ever see you again? He asked quietly. I looked at him for a long moment. Maybe. How do I fix this? I gave the only honest answer I had. You can't fix what happened. He lowered his head. Then what do? I opened my car door. Start noticing the people nobody else notices. Then I drove away, leaving behind the house where I had spent 32 years learning to doubt myself, and realizing, for the first time, that I no longer needed anyone inside it to tell me whether I was worth believing. For the first few mornings after I left my parents' house, I kept expecting to wake up feeling guilty. Guilt had always arrived before breakfast. It was almost a reflex. If someone in my family was upset, I assumed I had caused it. If a conversation ended badly, I replayed every sentence looking for the moment I should have stayed quiet. But this time was different. I still felt sad. I still missed the family I wished I had. What I didn't feel anymore was responsible for protecting a version of the truth that had nearly cost me my life. My apartment was quieter than it had ever been, yet somehow it felt safer too. There were no unexpected comments about me worrying too much. No reminders to stop making everything into a problem. No one rolled their eyes if I stopped to catch my breath while climbing the stairs. My life became surprisingly simple. I took my medication every morning. I attended every follow-up appointment with Dr. Mercer. I learned which foods helped, how much rest I actually needed, and how to recognize the difference between normal fatigue and symptoms that deserved attention. For the first time in my life, listening to my own body didn't feel selfish. It felt responsible. A month after leaving my parents' house, I officially changed my emergency contact. Tessa's name replaced my mother's on every medical form. The nurse at Dr. Mercer's office smiled as she updated my file. Family member? She asked. I looked toward Tessa, who was reading a magazine in the waiting room. No, I said. Someone who shows up. Somehow, that answer felt more accurate than any label could have been. Dear. Mercer noticed changes in me that had nothing to do with my heart. During one appointment, he closed my chart and asked, "How are you sleeping? Better? Anxiety? Less," he smiled. "Good. Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why did everyone else miss this?" He thought for a moment before answering. "Medicine can miss things." "I don't mean doctors." I looked down at my hands. "I mean my family." He leaned back in his chair. "Sometimes people stop seeing the person in front of them." What do they see instead? The story they've been telling themselves for years. I nodded slowly because that explained almost everything. In my family's story, Grant was dependable. My mother was always right. My father kept the peace. And I overreacted. Once a story becomes familiar enough, people stop checking whether it's still true. About 6 weeks later, Howard asked if we could meet for coffee. I almost declined. Then I remembered what Dr. Mercer had told me about healing. It didn't always require reconciliation. Sometimes it only required clarity. We met at a small cafe halfway between our homes. My father looked thinner than I remembered. He ordered black coffee and spent almost 5 minutes stirring it without taking a sip. Finally, he reached into his jacket pocket and handed me an envelope. "What's this?" I asked. "Letters. From who?" I frowned. "There are several. I couldn't fit 12 years into one apology. I didn't open them there. I wasn't ready." "Your mother wanted to come," he said quietly. I nodded but said nothing. "I told her she needed to respect your decision." "Did she?" He gave a tired smile. "She's trying. Trying to respect it. Trying to understand why respecting it matters." We sat in silence for a while before he spoke again. "I've spent my whole life thinking avoiding conflict made me a good husband." He looked down into his coffee. "It made me a terrible father." I believed he meant it. But believing someone is sorry and allowing them back into your life are two different decisions. "Dad," I said gently, "I forgive you enough to stop carrying this every day." He looked up hopefully. "But forgiveness isn't the same thing as pretending we're fine." He nodded with tears in his eyes. "I know." And for once I believed he really did. Grant reached out a few weeks later, not with excuses, not with long emotional messages. Just a single text. "I had my follow-up screening today. Everything's stable. Thank you for making me take this seriously." I stared at the message for several minutes before replying. "I'm glad you went. Take care of yourself." That was all. We weren't close. Maybe we never would be again. But at least we were finally speaking from the truth, instead of from the roles our parents had assigned us. Marianne kept writing letters too, unlike my father's. Most of hers still contained explanations. She reminded me how overwhelmed she had been after Howard's diagnosis. She described the pressure of Grant's football future. She insisted she had loved both her children equally. She never once denied writing the word later on that old cardiology letter. Instead, she kept trying to explain why it had seemed reasonable at the time. I stopped looking for the perfect apology after reading the third letter. Some people spend so many years defending their choices that admitting the full truth feels impossible. I accepted that my mother might never become the person I wanted her to be. Accepting that reality hurt less than waiting for her to change. Nearly a year passed. My health stabilized. My medication routine became ordinary instead of frightening. I returned to hiking, though at a slower pace than before. I stopped apologizing every time I needed to rest. I even caught myself smiling one afternoon after climbing a long hill because I had recognized my limits instead of ignoring them. That simple decision felt like a victory. One afternoon, Dr. Mercer asked if I would consider speaking at a small community event focused on inherited heart conditions. "You don't have to discuss your family," he said, "just your experience recognizing symptoms." My first instinct was to say no. Public speaking had never appealed to me. Then I remembered lying on the floor at my father's birthday party, begging people to believe me. If sharing my story kept one other person from doubting themselves the way I had, maybe it was worth the discomfort. The event was smaller than I expected. About 50 people sat in folding chairs inside a local community center. Doctors spoke first. then patience. When it was my turn, I walked to the microphone with shaking hands. I didn't mention my parents by name. I didn't talk about Grant's football scholarship. I didn't describe every painful conversation. Instead, I talked about something much simpler. The most dangerous thing I inherited, I said, wasn't my heart condition. The room grew quiet. It was the belief that I couldn't trust myself. Several people nodded. I continued. For years, I confused being dismissed with being wrong. They aren't the same thing. After the presentation ended, a young woman waited until almost everyone else had left before approaching me. She looked nervous. Can I ask you something? Of course. My family always says I worry too much. She hesitated before continuing. I've been having fainting spells, and they keep telling me it's stress. I felt a lump rise in my throat. Have you talked to a doctor? She shook her head. I didn't want to seem dramatic. I recognized those words immediately because they had once belonged to me. I smiled gently. Please make the appointment. Tears filled her eyes. Really? Really? She nodded, thanked me, and walked away with her phone already in her hand, probably searching for a clinic. I stood there for a long moment after she left. That was the moment I realized karma wasn't watching my mother lose control of the family narrative. It wasn't seeing Grant confront his own privilege or hearing my father finally admit he had failed me. Karma wasn't revenge at all. Karma was knowing that what happened to me might never happen to someone else, because I finally stopped protecting a lie that never deserved my loyalty. As I walked out of the community center, Jutra, Mercer caught up beside me. You did well, he said. I smiled. A year ago, I would have apologized for speaking too much. He laughed softly. And today? I looked toward the parking lot where Tessa was waiting beside her car. Today? I said. I trust myself enough to know when my voice matters. If there's one thing I hope anyone listening to my story remembers, it's this. The people who know you the longest are not always the people who know you best. Sometimes the bravest thing you'll ever do is believe yourself before the people who should have believed you first. And if you've ever been told you were overreacting, I'd love to know what happened when you finally stopped apologizing for telling the truth. A few months after that community event, I received a handwritten card with no return address. Inside was a single sentence. I finally made the appointment. Thank you for convincing me that listening to my own body wasn't selfish. I never found out whether the woman from the seminar received good news or difficult news, but I realized I didn't need to. The important part was that she had chosen to ask questions instead of apologizing for having them. I placed the card in the same folder that still held my father's old cardiology letter and betrayal. Mercer's handwritten note. One reminded me of what silence could cost. The other reminded me what one person willing to listen could change. My relationship with my family never returned to what it had been, and honestly, I stopped wanting it too. My father continued sending letters every few months. Sometimes I answered, sometimes I didn't. Grant and I slowly rebuilt something that looked less like the relationship we were supposed to have and more like two adults trying to understand each other without the roles we had inherited as children. My mother never completely stopped explaining herself, but she eventually stopped asking me to pretend the past had happened differently. That was enough for me. Forgiveness, I learned, isn't always inviting someone back into your life exactly as they were. Sometimes it's simply refusing to let yesterday keep deciding who you become tomorrow. Today, I still have regular appointments with my cardiologist. I still carry medication in my bag, and I still pay attention whenever my body whispers that something isn't right. The difference is that I no longer ask for permission to believe what I feel. I don't apologize before asking for help. I don't shrink myself to make other people comfortable. And I don't confuse being dismissed with being wrong. Looking back, the doctor who saved my life did more than recognize a condition hidden inside my heart. He helped me uncover something even more dangerous, the habit of doubting myself every time someone I loved told me I was overreacting. Losing that habit became the greatest healing of all. If my story reaches even one person who has spent years wondering whether they're too sensitive, too emotional, or making a big deal out of nothing, then every painful moment was worth sharing. Because sometimes the bravest decision you'll ever make isn't proving your family wrong. It's finally believing yourself when they never did. So let me ask you one question before you go. Have you ever ignored what your own body, or your own heart, was trying to tell you simply because someone else convinced you that you were overreacting?